And all right.
Hey, hi guys.
Hello.
Yeah, see you, even it's over the TV. This. If there's any question, maybe John helps me because I'm too far away from the screen and I don't see what it says.
I gotcha.
First of all, I'm very happy to be able to do this for Florida Rum Society. I've been a big for the past 30 years, and I've been fortunate to work with wine and spirits for almost 40 years. And some of you may think that why he was only 3 years old when he started. Well, I was fortunate to grow up in a restaurant family, and I started already in 1976 working in restaurants. And in Sweden, where I'm from, in the 1980s, which was a boom for wines and spirit and good living. And so that's really where my started in good products, great wines, great spirits. And I had the fortune to follow the development, anything from beer and wines and spirits. In my opinion, all of them has been better today. I can see quality increase. I can see technique getting better. And also the taste we have today for products has evolved. I think we are more, at least some of us, are more concerned about balance and quality and uniqueness than we were 30, 40 years ago. My background is hotel and restaurant. I started in 1976, grew up in a restaurant family, and I went through whole the chain from cleaning dishes in my dad's restaurant to food and beverage in a Hilton in Stockholm in the 1990s. In between, I was working as a sommelier, so I was fortunate to really try a lot of good stuff. In 1990, I decided to start my own business, and I started in the spirit business in 1993. That's the short of my background. Now we're going to have the long story. It's about Swedish Punch. I'm so happy that I have the chance to talk to you this way because, first of all, not a lot of people knows what it is. I would say that if I tell you it's a rum liqueur, you know more than 99.9% of all Swedes. And they've been drinking it since 1733. So there you see already what the problem is. The history is amazing. It's 287 years of history, almost to the date, actually September. And it started out with something called the Swedish East Indian Company. Many of the European countries had East Indian Company. They had the Dutch and the British specifically, the Spanish, and so on. Sweden was quite late to start that, and we didn't have any colonies, but we worked a lot with trading with China. So the first ship in the Swedish East Indian Company was called Riksvesia, King of Sweden in Latin. And it left Gothenburg, which is on the west coast. We from Stockholm call it the backside of Sweden. Of course, if you're from Gothenburg, it's the front side of Sweden. And it left in March 1732 to take the voyage to Canton, China. And as you know, in those days, it didn't fast. You had to stop a lot. And after about 120 days, they finally arrived and stayed for quite a long time in China. So we are now, not 120, 400, and the total trip was 550 days. They started in March, they came to China in late September, October, and started to load porcelain, a lot of tea, cotton, really everything that you can find, spices. That was high merchandise for the Swedish market. And then they left to go back to Gothenburg. On this trip, they were stopped in the Strait of Sund, which is the strait in between Borneo and Java, by the Dutch Navy saying, "We don't believe that you are a Swedish trade ship. You have to come in with us." This sounds like today, but basically, you have to come in with us to Batavia, and you probably recognize the name, show your papers, and we have to figure this out. So Batavia in these days was a colony of Holland, a Dutch colony, and they had to stay there for 40 days to clear up their papers. I know quite a lot about that trip because there's a book written about it. And this is quite interesting. Well, the book is not that interesting except certain facts. This is written by the supercargör, and the supercargör is the guy who's buying everything. Supercargör is in charge of buying all the porcelain and everything like that, the food and so on. And he wrote, this is his diary. And the cool thing with his diary is there's a lot of inside details about what happened when they came to Batavia and on the trip. Unfortunately, there was a lot of bitching about the bad situation he had with the captain and et cetera, et cetera. So reading it, it's you go to sleep. But from the facts, it's really, really interesting. So this guy, he was also British. And when he came to Batavia, apart from having all those problems with paperwork, they also took in provision. One of the provision was Arak. So how many of you guys knows exactly what Arak is or what Batavia Arak is?
I'm guessing we have a mix of people here, some of which know very much and then maybe some don't as much.
Yeah, a lot of misconception over there because one of the most dangerous words you can use when you talk about Swedish Punch or when you talk about Batavia Arak is only use the word Arak. If you say, oh yeah, it's made from Arak, it can mean anything from something that comes from horse manure to sugarcane molasses. Yeah, that one is a Batavia Arak. So that means it's made in a special way and it's made on the island of Java. And Batavia Arak versus Raki or Arak, you know, the word actually means alcohol. It also means juice or sweat. So if somebody misunderstands you when you talk about Arak, they can think that something is made from sweat. Not very nice. So you have to be careful when you talk about it. The difference between a lot of these Araks is that the Batavia Arak is made from sugarcane molasses. Sugarcane molasses was introduced by Chinese distillers or Chinese sugar farmers or sugar growers. And they had technique from China where they implied to make a rum. Technically what we call a rum, they call it Arak. And it was really done in the old traditional ways, what we see today as making rum. They used the sugarcane molasses. What a lot of people believe about the Batavia Arak is that it's made from rice. It's not made from rice. In the fermentation, they are using something called the ragi. The ragi is a combination of cooked Java red rice and yeast. And this is to feed the yeast to start the fermentation. And in the old days, they also used a little bit of garlic and things like that in there to keep the flies away. But traditionally, the rice is only in the yeast mix for start the fermentation. So it's not made from rice, which a lot of people believe, as I said, big misconception. So, and once they done the pot still distillation, another funky part, and of course, funky part in the Batavia Arak is the fermentation. The second funky part is they are aged in open tanks. They're fermented in open tanks and it's stored in open tanks. Some of them are teak wood. They don't have oak over there, so they take what they have. In this case, it's teak wood. And it's been done pretty much the same way since the 1500s over there. And today, we are still buying it from Java, Indonesia. Today, of course, we're buying through our good friends in Holland, Share, which is an amazing company regarding supplying Batavia Arak as the bottle that you show, Chris. And I've been working with them for 28 years, and I've had tastings that you can't believe over there. Amazing. Except my first Batavia Arak tasting. When I came down there in 1992 to try Batavia Arak, I had no idea what it was. No Swedes know what it was. And they gave me a flight that was a mile long, and it was everything from it tastes like shit to reasonably good products. So having said that, most Batavia racks, especially going back a little bit, are blends of several distilleries in order to create character, balance, and more of an interesting product. So fascinating subject. Going back to history, when the ship finally left Batavia, they had 11 leggers of arak with them in the cargo. Anybody knows what a legger is? It's a Dutch term for a big barrel, normally used for wine, and it's roughly about 570 liters of alcohol in this case.
Henrik, before you move on too quickly from Iraq, we did have a question from John Malley. He was asking, roughly, can you estimate how many Batavia Iraq distilleries exist in the world today?
Well, first of all, they only exist on the island of Java. That's the only place you buy Batavia Iraq. Any other Iraq comes from anywhere else is not the Batavia Iraq, or actually, as it was called in the beginning, Iraq from Batavia. They had to brand it because people didn't know what it was or where it came from. So I have no idea, because the other interesting aspect of Indonesia, it is the Buddhist country. They don't make alcohol. That's a good answer, right? So this is normally when you find a distillery on the island of Java is behind a sugarcane refinery. You know, they're just taking care of the leftovers, and some of it goes to the perfume industry, and a lot of it is exported. And you know that we're using Batavia Iraq today in everything from chocolate to flavoring tobacco or to make Swedish punch. Anything more Batavia Iraq so far? Let's jump back on the ship and get to Gothenburg, okay? So 550 days after they started, they arrived to Gothenburg, Sweden, West Coast, September 7th, 1733. On this voyage, they, of course, drank some of those 11 leggers, which is about 6,000 liters of alcohol, which is a lot of alcohol in those days. The ship itself was only 500 ton. So we're not talking about huge ships here. During this voyage, the supercargo Campbell, he used Iraq to make a rum punch. He was English, as I mentioned. Actually, he was Scottish, but he was used to make the rum punch. And you all probably know what a rum punch is. It's rum, sugar, lemon, and water. And this was for A, keep the sailors happy, and B, to put the lemon in and try to stop one of the biggest problems they had on the ship was scurvy. And so that's what they started to make, but they used Batavia Iraq instead of rum. So this tradition, when it came to Sweden, it was brought in right away into the rich and famous, because this was something that was very expensive. The king has stake in it. You know, all the rich people wanted to try this novelty, and they did the same thing as they did on the ship. In order to melt the sugar, you had to boil the water. So you boil water, you melt the sugar, you put the Batavia Iraq in, and the lemon. Sometimes maybe a little bit of tea, because they had a lot of tea in their cargo. And they drank it warm. These ships were not heated or cooled in any way. It was a very, very long and very cold voyage. So this is what probably the only fun thing they had was to get the dram, as it was called, on board. So when this tradition came to Sweden to make a punch or a rum punch, it was started to be done in all the famous and on the salons, and it was warmed up the same way, served in punch bowls from China, and it was drunk in cups, the coffee cups that came from China. And if you look at one of those mule mugs nowadays, this how they developed in Sweden afterwards. It made them smaller than this, but because the product was warm, you needed something with an ear. So this looks very much like a traditional Swedish punch bowl going back already in the 1700s. So the tradition really took on really quickly, And in 1758, the Swedish, remember now we are all still in the 1700s. 1758, the Swedish king Adolf Fredrik declared a royal decree said Batavia rack, Swedish punch has to be made in Sweden using primarily Batavia rack. For me, that is a classification, if anything. So it was really defined that concrete in 1758. The name Swedish punch, well, because we used Arak instead of rum, it became called Swedish punch. So we have another
video, right?
Sorry? Andy?
I think it might have been just an errand.
Okay. And we were drinking it warm all the way up to the 1840s. And in the 1840s, the spirit business started to use bottles much more. So all these companies that was selling alcohol, they started to put it in bottles, very much looking like this. This is a very traditional, called cognac ass. And they started to make brands. Suddenly we had brands on the market. In 1840s, we had already 2-3 brands that did the Swedish punch. And from that, people started to cool it down because it was much easier to put this on ice and to drink it warm. There's a strange tradition in Sweden that almost completely disappeared. It's to drink it with pea soup. It really sounds strange, but it made sense in those days because a pea soup in the 17, 18, 1900, early 1900s was a very fat soup. You used the pork and a lot of fat. You cooked it, all that fat was in the soup. And anybody who had the pleasure to have foie gras and a Sauterne wine or similar combination of fat and sweet understands why that was a good combination. Today, the pea soup in Sweden is lean and a lean ham and it doesn't work at all. And the nutrition has basically disappeared. But the drinking it's cold is still flourishing. At the end of the 1800s, it peaked and we sold around 5 million liters a year of this. To give you a reference, we only had 5 million inhabitants. And this was expensive. So there was a lot of men basically who was drinking this, sitting on the veranda.
I took my headphones upstairs.
Ice cold and drinking Swedish punch. And smoking cigars. So this was the go-to thing, cigars, Swedish punch. And it makes sense. You have the rum, you have the sweetness of the liqueur, and that balance well anything that has to do with bitterness, coffee, tobaccos, chocolates, and so on and so forth. So men, veranda, ice cold, a lot of it. So if anybody wonders this one, I think I met some of you guys up on rum festivals, but this Thai is rum label. This is Batavia, Arak, and Swedish punch labels from the early 1900s. We had probably 50, 60 brands all over the place. Anytime we had a chance to celebrate something, they launched a new one. So this was the go-to product for the Swedish people, the rich and famous, and a little bit together with of course, with cognacs and rum, mostly French, but the big thing. So, and unfortunately, that's 1917. A Swedish punch in those days was a very sweet product. I actually have had a chance to try a Swedish punch from 1915. A lot of sugar and very poor quality of the Arak. That was the go product. That's how it was. The technique of handling the spirit, the technique of refining and producing it, and the sweet tooth in those days was much more elaborate than it is today. So you should remember that when you think about classic cocktails you see in cocktail books. All the products that it was based on was way more sweet than what Kronan, probably about 100 more grams of sugar per liter than what you see today. So big difference. And of course, a big difference in the product we are using. Another big thing that happened in these early days was in 1917, the Swedish monopoly was created. That means that the government bought anything that was on the market. Every company that was out there dealing with alcohol was either shut down or sold to the Swedish monopoly. And of all these, a lot of beautiful brands with directions, some of them had, and this is another misconception, in any commercial Swedish punch, there were never, ever any spices. So whenever you read about spices and herbs and things like that, that may be somebody's grandma's or great-grandma's old recipe, had nothing to do with Swedish punch or commercial punches at all. The only thing you could have seen maybe was a little bit of lemon juice or a little bit of wine. It was one brand that had some wine in it, which was actually a pretty good idea because it softened up that sweetness, but no spices. Please remember that.
Can we just take a step back and maybe if you could sort of elucidate what, you know, the most generic type of Swedish punch, what are the guaranteed ingredients and how do you make the most basic form?
Well, the basic form is Batavia rack, water, and sugar.
And along those lines, I actually had a good question to follow up. For people who haven't tried Iraq before, is there a difference? You mentioned it's essentially similar to rum in terms of production with minor differences. Does that come out in the flavor profile? And if so, how would you explain that to somebody who hasn't tried Iraq?
Well, I think it's a little bit different. I mean, most of you guys has probably tried the Batavia rack that Eric has, Eric at House of Pens. Is anybody who has not tried it? Yeah. Well, you know, the problem with Batavia rack is that the tradition that we see in West Indies and many other areas of rum making, that they didn't elaborate anything that has to do with aging, you know, barrels and all of these things in order to refine the product whatsoever. So the key thing with what I would call a Batavia Iraq style is more of those little strange funky notes, a little woody notes that I recognize from the teak wood. I don't really have a much better character description of it because for me, it's very different from a rum, even though it's made with the same principles, but it's made differently. It still have the sugarcane base character, the alcohol base character, the little dark, little bit leathery kind of characters, but maybe a little bit spicy if you want to use spice in this sense, especially from the open fermentation, the rice and the teak wood. But
is there any standards for aging as well with it?
Say it again.
For Iraq, does it have standards for aging?
No. There's no refinement in it whatsoever. Any aging that happens is what the buyers like Share do. When they bring it over to Holland, there is additional aging. They age it in barrels. They age it mainly in barrels to achieve more of a complexity in it. So that's why there's a huge variation in characters. Everything from, and as I said, it's used in so many ways, from all the way from making cakes and chocolates to flavoring cigars and tobaccos. And I remember when I asked the owner of Share in the 1992, tell me, where do they use Batavia rack? And he said, you would be surprised if I told you. That was the only answer I got. And that's the only answer I can give you.
It's very dry, okay? It's very dry, and it's very funky on the nose, almost like a Jamaican rum. Like you would expect it to have a very high ester count. Whether or not it does, I don't know, but it has that character, I guess, probably from its pot still distillation. And it's funky and dry, but then the the finish on it is almost non-existent. It's really hot in the front, and then it just fades away.
Now we have to remember that the Batavia rack you're trying there from Austin is a different blend that I have in Kronan. So when you know, just go back to that part, when I started to work with this, for me, the key thing was to build complexity, to build balance, because that's what I enjoy when I drink when I want a good Swedish punch. The ones before wasn't that good, so that there's a reason why I started, and that's one of the reasons. But having every raw material, you know, if you put shit in, you get shit out too. So you really have to be very careful when you start to create your balance. You put different kind of ester styles and distillation styles into the product, and you want front notes and you want back notes. And so for Neustadt and what we have in Kronan is very different actually. But there's a limitation there too, because there's no refinement in the Batavia rack production. However, today we start to see more Indonesian rums based on the Batavia rack. We start to see more coming out where they're trying to focus more on taking that product, put it into barrels, aging, more of the refinement we see in the West Indies and in other areas. Now this is happening because the interest of rum, for one, and they're looking for new ways of using a very traditional product. I applaud that because it is a kind of funky, kind of fun thing with that Batavia rack, and especially when you look back how old it is. And just a little fun thing about that, the method of they doing the fermentation with the rice is part what you also find later on in Japan for the sake. So a lot of that tradition of making alcohol that came from China into Indonesia with Chinese immigrants was the technique of using both the rice and the sugarcane and develop a much more refined product. If we had been now in the 1800s and maybe in UK, you could buy, it was the finest spirit you can buy in those days. The West Indian rums originally was crap compared to what the Batavia rack was. It was, you know, double pot stilled and you know, cool stuff. So it really had its highlight in the beginning, but I see today that is developing, and I'm very excited about that. I want to have better Batavia rack too, if I can, but I'm very happy what I have already.
So maybe that's a good segue, Henrik, to talk about Kronan and what you've done with the Iraq blend that you've used and your product.
Exactly. So the interesting thing is that, you know, if you had lived in Sweden from 1917 to 1993, nothing would have happened. The product was the same quality, the same low raw material, and people were basically drinking Swedish punch because of tradition. Not really because they liked it, but you know, you cool anything down or you heat it up, it tastes better. You know how it is with highly sweetened product. Like a limoncello should be in the freezer. High sweetness, you put it in the freezer, you take down that sweetness character a little bit and you enjoy it more. The same thing was done with that. So in 1991, I started to think about why is the most traditional Swedish beverage, it's not vodka, absolutely, it's not that old. Why does it taste like crap? Why is it not better? Why are we in Sweden serving at the Nobel dinner, you know how famous that is. Why do we serve French liqueurs and all these other things when we have one of those most traditional rum liqueurs in the world in Sweden? Well, because it doesn't taste good, period. And why don't we export it? Well, because it doesn't taste good. So really in Sweden and a little bit in Finland, it really was, that's where it happened. So having worked with what I did, I actually, so this was the first creation. I don't really think you see what it says.
No, we can't read it, so you may have to read it to us there.
So it's actually called Facile, funny enough.
Got it.
And this was This was the first new Swedish punch on the market since 1917. And I'm happy to say that what we did there was solemnly focus on the quality of the Batavia rack. And we took one of the old traditions from early 1900s and we mix it up with, in this case, Jamaican rum to, do it more complex. And this is what they did also in the early 1900s. They put sometimes a little bit of rum, maybe a little bit of cognac to make the complexity and the taste better in those classic Swedish punches. So going forward in history, and I just want to brag a little bit, if you may, Nobel Dinner 2000, Facile was served instead of Grand Marnier. So that was one of the highlights in my life, to take Swedish punch onto the international scene, and in this case also the Nobel Dinner. Going forward in time, in 2010, Eric Seed contacted me, and I had moved to the United States at that time. He said, hey, we need a Swedish punch. At that time, I didn't know so much about the culture that was over here in the United States and in other parts of Europe. For us, it was very straightforward, maybe a couple of simple things in Sweden, but moving over here and hearing all about, the Savoy, the Waldorf Astorias, the Swedish punch traditions, it was mind-blowing. I didn't know about that history. So we started to work on this, and I said, great, let's create an even better Swedish punch, a Swedish punch of today, using the best raw material, using the blending technique, and make it a little bit less sweet, and hopefully find something that fits into today's profile of a Swedish punch in the classic cocktails, in the modern cocktails. So that's really where it started out. And of course, the emphasis on a great base blend, 50+% of the product is Batavia rack. It comes in 60 ABV when we start blended. The finished product out of the distillery around 70, but we receive it always in about 60% ABV, 120 proof. And we started to blend it with about 20% Jamaica rum. And then I wanted something funky more. And we started to look at Guyana. And the Port Murat distillery, wood stills, funky characters, to really to play into the funkiness of the Batavia rack too, and try to find a balance between all these elements. And I just wanted to take that possibility too. You see all these marks? When I found out there's 18 cocktails in this book which had Swedish punch in it. That's mind-blowing. Especially in Sweden, where we didn't know squat about it. I'm fascinating about this. Anyway, so the idea from when we started to work is it really to find that really modern classic balance of the rums, of the Batavia rack, and with no other influences than the funkiness of those two, the Guyana and the Java, and sort of the mediator from the Jamaican rum, to get that balance, to make a good complexity. And the sugar level in this tins is 204 grams per liter. It is a liqueur, but it's on the lower end. So if you go to Grand Marniers or Cointreaux and everything, you find it much higher. I didn't want to take away the sugar because that's part of the tradition. It is really a very crucial element, I think, in putting all these flavors together. Somebody may ask, why is it only 26 ABV? Well, I have studied Swedish punch for 28 years. I've never seen anywhere where it says it should be 26 ABV. But if you think about it, when people started to make it, they had water, they had rum, they had sugar, and they had lime, and they started to put it together in a tasty proportion, and it ended up probably being somewhere around 25, 26%. So when it came to the situation where they was able to start to measure it, well, That's where it started. Since then, it's always been 26%. Quick thing about Swedish Punch history again. When I started in 93, we only had 4 brands. One disappeared and Facile came on the market. Since then, we have seen an increase in brands, ideas, old recipes. Unfortunately, still, Sweden is such a small market, so many of the small companies don't have a chance to get out there. It's difficult to get outside with a funky little product like Swedish Punch. I have to mention one thing. That little bottle that you have in front of you, it looks like this in the big form. This is, and you're the first one who sees it. The label you have there is the new American label. This is our international label. We are selling today in 6 countries. We are in 3 continents, which sounds really fun when you say it. We actually do quite good business in Singapore, and we are in UK, Switzerland, Holland, and Sweden, and United States. So this comes from our international label, and we have production now in a few weeks, and you're going to see it coming into the market during the next couple of months.
So
but
this is like the American debut here we're getting.
It is, and the cool thing is, what I wanted to do with this is more to take in that historic perspective of that little ship that you see, and you can see it on the original label too. It's actually the ship Rex Svecia, King of Sweden, that was bringing in the first Batavia after Sweden in September 1733. So we tried to bring in, it actually is Swedish, yes. So why do we call it Swedish Punch over here? Swedish Punch is a classification, like Calvados is a classification, Champagne a classification. So when you talk about it, Kronan, it's a Swedish Punch or a rum liqueur. It doesn't, it's not one word. So Swedish Punch is a European classification, which means it has to be made in Sweden, it has to be made in certain ways, it has to have the Batavia right, etc., etc., etc. It's a fairly strict classification. So we have that on the label, but we also put a little bit about the rum, so people have an idea that, oh, it's a rum liqueur. Oh, dang, I didn't know that. Hey, you have to tell people what it is. So, debut for the label, what do you think about it? What do you think
I'll
about
let somebody jump in here, but I think it's a classic label, and it says what it needs to say in terms of where it's made and sourced, which is nice. I think it's very, very upscale.
Good. That was the idea. It worked really well in Europe and elsewhere. Okay, enough talking. I can see that you have started to drink already, which is a really good idea. Normally, when I introduce Kronan, I always like people to understand what I'm talking about. I have to understand the product. For me to try it straight up, hopefully some of you guys have done that already, it's a way to understand it. I like to do.
If you're doing that, I'll read you some of the comments. People really do like the label. One says, I love the label, very elegant. Somebody said simple and classy. The black label is beautiful with the silver lettering. So pretty good feedback overall on the chat from that.
You know, the only problem with the black label, the original label we had for Kronan was, I remember going into liquor stores, passing the bottle without seeing it, and it's my brand. So, one reason. I always like to start my tests in a snifter or similar kind of glass, because I believe that even though we don't have a lot of alcohol, 26 ABV is not high, we have a lot of esters, aromas that I really enjoy. That's the key thing with this product. It's not strength, it's not overproof, it's flavors and taste. That's the key idea with it. And when I drink it, it all depends on in what situation. A lot of people just drink it like this. And why don't I say skål, as we say in Sweden, skål to everybody. And skål.
Skål.
So anyway, the next step is very often, okay, if you don't drink it like this, room temperature, because I think that if you can't serve anything room temperature, it's not a good product. you have to be able to show all the flaws back and forth, or all the positive sides. I like to take it to the next step. And nice little ice cube. Chill it down a little bit. I mean, maybe it's a warm day, you're sitting on a back porch, enjoying the afternoon. And it really changes a little bit because it takes that sweetness slightly down, right? Next step is to take a what I would call a digestive into a cocktail. And this is for people who met me at the rum festivals. It's really a very, very simple step. You have probably seen the classic Dr. cocktail. A Dr. cocktail is Swedish punch and lime juice. You're going to find tons and tons of different cocktails out there with different versions of a Dr. cocktail. But the original classic Dr. cocktail is only Swedish punch and lime juice. Because a lot of the Swedish punches in those days were very sweet, you can also see them with Jamaican rum. You know, I use always a little bit of Smith & Cross, for instance, and you mix it with Kronan. But for me, you don't need that. And normally the recipe is 2 part Kronan, 1 part lime juice. You know, I do a little bit like this. Stir it around, and it takes it to a cocktail. The lime juice, and if you're really talented, you put it in a shaker and you shake it instead. And everybody who knows how to make a daiquiri, well, Kronan already have sugar. So it's rum, sugar, and lime juice, and you have a Kronan daiquiri or a Dr. cocktail.
What are the proportions that you use typically, Henrik?
I use 2 to 1. This is a preference. Some people would have less acidity, some will have more. But I find that with Kronan, 2 to 1, especially when you shake it, it's a good ratio. And it really works. It's some of the best cocktails I ever had I was at the rum festival in San Francisco, went to this little speakeasy, and they made a Dr. cocktail. I think she put some egg white in it when she did it, but it was absolutely amazing. So I think it depends a little bit on the lime juice you have, but 2 to 1 is a good ratio. And it really takes it from that liqueur into a cocktail instead. If we look at classic cocktail, I like simplicity. You know, for people who doesn't know Italian or French, facile means to do something easy. I don't like it when it's too complicated. So, you know, having Kronan and lime, that's really, you know, that's a good level for me. But we have had really fun experiments using Kronan in very, very classic cocktails. One of them, and you don't have to make this, but I'm just gonna, you know, introduce it to you, is when you make a Negroni. Anybody had a Swedish Negroni before? Well, and before you comment on my technique, I'm not a bartender, I'm not a mixologist, okay? Just so you know. You take your favorite gin. This is one of mine. This is a 46 ABV, but you can take anything that has fairly good taste. I wanted to make, if you make a Negroni with Kronan, you need a good gin with complexity. So 1 part Kronan, 1 part gin, and what else do you need in a Negroni? Well, you need vermouth. So I like either an Amaro vermouth or a little bit more complex vermouth. This is an ancient style vermouth. 1 part of that. Nice ice cube, stir around a little bit. I don't know how you do that. That's so it looks good, but anyway. Cool it down. And slice of orange. And then you have a Swedish Negroni. It sounds strange. I mean, there's no Campari in it, but I call it the Swedish Negroni, so I think I'm excused. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't taste gin, it doesn't taste Kronan, and it doesn't taste vermouth. It's just a well-balanced Swedish Negroni. Questions?
I would call that a necroni.
Necroni?
So Henrik,
Yes.
has your blend or have you used different rums over the years? I mean, I know there's a Jamaican element and a Guyana element, but have you switched distilleries at all, or you try to keep it constant?
Well, you know how it is with when you try to make something that is not vintage, or you try to something that people can constantly enjoy going forward. You know, standard champagnes and all these other things that have the same kind of issue. I want it to be constant, so people who buys it knows what they get. So I may come up with a new blend someday. This is now 10 years old. I come out with something new, but probably in a different shape. But as it is today, I'm very happy with the blend. And the key issue for us is to make sure it always tastes the same.
And are you using a single source from the Jamaican and the Guyana rum, single distillery, or is it a blend of different distilleries from those countries? Or I know you mentioned the Port Morant for Guyana, so that clears that up. But for Jamaica,
I have had the privilege to work with Share in Amsterdam for 28 years, and the key idea to work with a single supplier that they can make sure that the blend that I get of Jamaica rum has a consistency style. So I don't select, oh, we're gonna work with this year or this year. We try to make them, you know, inside the same concept. So the only thing that we play around with a little bit of the Guyana, but the Guyana so far has been nice and constant, and we're trying to keep the style so you don't get a unbalanced product. You know, I don't want it to stick up. I don't want anything to be outside and maybe, yeah, I don't know, disturb the characters. I don't know if that's the right word. Okay?
I'll tell you what, with the 2-to-1 with lime juice, it's perfect. It's an instant cocktail. It's really nice.
I agree.
It's funny. I when I met my girlfriend Barbara, she informed me early that, well, you know, I'm sorry, honey, I don't like rum and I don't like sweet things. I made her a Dr. Cocktail, put the lime juice in there, and now it's her favorite. So it really takes it from one end of the segment into completely different. I like that. I think it's really cool.
I've got a tougher question for you, Henrik, but I'm curious to hear your answer. So I watched a documentary on a spirit on Scotch recently, and they talked about the title of Master Blender and how that sometimes gets thrown around. I think in your case, having 28 years experience and doing what you've done, you've earned the title of Master Blender. But I'm curious for you, what makes somebody a Master Blender, and what do you think about that title, and how does that come about?
Well, you know, back again to my background. I started in 1993, my company. For anybody who enjoys looking at the history, if you go to facile.se, you're going to find my old company still there, still producing alcohols. And we started out by making Swedish punch and then other Swedish traditional products. And that escalated into quite a lot of product. When I moved to United States, I was already 50 years old. Yes, thank you. It doesn't show, but I was. And I started to work with only blending. I didn't want to start a distillery. I mean, who wants really to do that, because it's a lot of work. And I used to have bottling plants and blending plants. So my goal was to work only with blending. And I've been doing that since 2006. Anything from gin, rums, bourbons, you name it. And for me, a master blender has nothing to do with distiller or flavorist or anything like that. A good blender for me, or master blender for me, is somebody who truly understands the raw material they are working with, that can constant make sure that that the product they are creating always tastes the same. I have a good example working with the wine industry for a very long time. You can recognize a good blender because you can see a red thread in his blending. And for me, that is very, very important. That means that you understand what you're doing. You understand the products that you're working with, and you can read and you can combine. That's a blender or master blender, depending on what level you are, for me.
And does that allow you to work with EA Shear, them being also kind of master blenders and having those years of experience? Does that help you to talk to them to get what you want?
Well, I mean, I don't know how many tastings I've had with them. And for people who knows Karsten, for instance, I know him for probably 25 years and have had enormously fun tasting raw material and trusting them to make sure that it always tastes the same. Karsten is a true master blender in anything that has to do with rums and Batavia Iraqs too. So that is for me, that has been a wealth of knowledge going forward, working with, you know, bourbons and whatever, everything I've been working with.
Henrik, how does the old style Swedish punch compare to the Kronan? Were you trying to replicate the traditional style, or create a new style? And if you were trying to create a new style, how does that compare with others on the market?
Well, you know, like I said, the reason I started was as a sommelier working in the restaurants. I never sold a glass of Swedish punch because of the poor quality. The raw material that was used had not changed since the 20s. There was no increase in quality, really high sugar, and very unbalanced product. So when I started, my goal was to find, okay, what is the soul behind the Swedish punch? What is the key element that could make me enjoy a Swedish punch? And for me, it was going back basically to the drawing board, find a really good Batavia Iraq, combine it with other similar kind of products in cohesive product. And if you want to replicate a Swedish punch from 1917, I just say why? Because what they had. If I do it today, actually there is one product on the market that is more pure Batavia Iraq than I, and it's only sold in Sweden. I made that in the 90s too, and it's a little bit less. And I would say that is more towards what maybe a traditional Swedish punch could be, but very much less in complexity, but cleaner in the Batavia Iraq, more harmonious character than what we have seen, and unfortunately still see in some of the products there on the Swedish market. It's one of the segment that goes like this, you know, selling less and less every year.
So I want to make sure we have time for another couple of questions, maybe one or two more, but I'm also really, really curious, and we're coming up on an hour or so, that you included this pimento. And I wanted to see what you're going to do with that, and what is that about?
Okay, I'm going to do two things for you. I have a challenge. First of all, I have to say thank you, Jay, if you can hear me, and the guys for the tasting last week with the Hawaiian rum. I actually had a full bottle of that at home. It was very, very interesting. There is nothing more interesting for me as not only as a brand owner, but work with product to understand why they do things. what was the purpose of doing this instead of that? And why did you select the juice instead of the molasses? And so on and so forth. And I love coffee. I start my morning with 2 rounds of double espressos before I do anything. Then I have another one just to top it off with. So for me, coffee, and this is actually really good coffee rum, is part of what I want to do cocktails with. So what I did today a little bit, you can get one glass, you can make it ice cream. Yeah. What I wanted to do and what I did today was simple. 1 part this, 1 part Kronan, and 1 part cream. Shake it, and a little cocktail glass as a after dinner drink. Well, what can go wrong is cream, coffee, and rum. It tasted delicious. But what I would like to do, and I'm going to throw this at you as rum lovers, if you can give me a really, really good recipe where I find Kronan and I find coffee rum and something else in a really good cocktail. It's going to be a prize.
So the challenge is you've got to use Kronan, you've got to use a coffee rum of some kind.
Yes.
And you've got to use some other ingredient.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. And it could be a pre-dinner drink. It could be an after-dinner drink. Fine. But I really want to have that because I love it myself. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a couple of really quick ones. You see what this is?
It's hard to see from where you're at there.
I'm going to tell you guys, this is an apple pie. One apple pie, and this is ice cream. This is actually salted ice cream. And if you're going to enjoy desserts, you have a glass of cool Kronan beside you. You have a warm apple pie with a little bit of vanilla ice cream or your favorite ice cream, and then you enjoy it. Delicious. What can go wrong? It's rum and banana, rum and apples.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if you make a classic tiki cocktail with Calvados, you know, the Diki, Calvados made from apples, Kronan, and grapefruit juice. Give me the ice cream.
Hey, Henrik, the apple pie was not in my sample box. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I said. You know, next time. But I tell you, a warm apple pie with a glass of chilled Kronan is absolutely delicious. Okay, next thing, more ice cream. Yay. Have you ever done bananas Foster? This is Flambe Banana, or bananas Foster as you call them.
Make it just because I like to say the word flambe.
Yeah, I love it. And Kronan works really well to flambe, even if it's only 26 ABV. Fantastic. You put that out over your ice cream, maybe a few drops of Kronan too if you want to. Absolutely delicious. Beautiful combination. Vanilla, bananas, brown sugar, a little bit of butter, of course, and rum. Couldn't be better. So now we're going to pimento. And the reason I sent you a bottle of pimento, 2 reasons. The main reason is in Florida, and I know it's maybe a little bit wrong audience here because you are truly rum enthusiasts and you like to drink your rums really straight and, you know, and so on. But if you want to do a truly good dark and stormy, what is a dark and stormy? Rum.
It's the beginning of every short story.
Lime juice. Yeah, the pimento. What is it? The pimento. In the freezer. I have my assistant helping me. Big production here, big production. One is not. Okay, and pimento. So this is a ginger chili tonic from France. It's a combination of a ginger ale with more botanicals, Jamaican chili, and a tonic. So if you make a dark and stormy, you have ginger ale and lime juice. Now you pour it over. And you make your dark and stormy. A little bit of lime. As we say in France, à votre santé. So the reason two reasons. I wanted you to try a really good, maybe a little bit different dark and stormy, because it's more complexity. It has a Jamaican chili. It's a lot of flavors. The second thing is I'm actually importing it to the United States. So it's a good combination. But the true story is I met Henrik, who is a French guy who makes this. We met at the Rum Festival. He was standing beside me and I had Kronan and we started to make dark and stormies. I loved it. It's all about the taste. So we started to take it in to the United States for the pure reason it actually tastes very good. You can buy it in 30 countries today, and the only reason he made it was he wanted to have something good to drink himself. He doesn't drink alcohol, funny guy. But what do you think about it?
It's unusual for me. I've never tasted anything like that with the spice on it or the heat that comes from it, but it's not overpowering at all. It has a really nice balance as a ginger with the heat on it. So I really enjoy it. I'm the sipping rum kind of person, so I'm a total noob when it comes to making drinks. So you shouldn't trust me with that. But I like what it is just in the bottle is really nice, and I would definitely like to experiment with that. So I'd love to hear from some of our members here. I know are great bartenders or good mixers, and what you all think about it.
Yeah, I actually just mixed that up, and it's really good. I like this. I mix dark and stormies a lot. This is definitely different. It's got a nice spice to it. You can taste the ginger, but you can taste the other spices. So very good.
Yeah. Henrik, with rum. I mean, I look around in the world where they are selling it today, and many of the markets are using it together with rum to make it not dark and stormy. We call it spicy and stormy or whatever. But it's really interesting because if you do like rum and want something, and unfortunately, I wanted to put it in my tea. I had to go down to liquor locker to pick it up. So I like this kind of beautiful. Is Abby there, right? There you go. Yes, beautiful. So I have them ordered. I have them down there, but I didn't have time to go down today. I was actually blending alcohol today. So I think it's fun when you can see all the different kind of ways you can use things. Like I showed you with the desserts, Kronan and desserts, long drinks, flavors. I love flavors. That's my passion. And the key thing for me is to find ways, how can I introduce my product with other good flavors? Apple pies, ginger, tonics. One of my first love was actually 50-50 over ice with bourbon. I love bourbon. I think it's a great combination. Depending on the bourbon, you do maybe 60-40 or blend it like that. The first time we did that was with Blanton's Kentucky bourbon at the Wine and Spirit Festival in Sweden. And it was delicious. And you know, Blanton's never mixed with anything. They don't want to. But bourbon and Kronan over ice.
I'm trying to remember whether or not I added the...
Henrik, there was somebody asking where the pimento is available. I know you mentioned the Kronan we know we can get from Sarasota Liquor Locker and Brock. I believe we are also bringing it to the Florida Rum Society store. I'll have to confirm that with Jay. But the pimento, is that going to be available in Florida?
It is available in Florida today with Brock. We are selling it online to I have a company that only works with non-alcoholic product called theperfectdrinks.com if you want to look into that. There's another one of my products, which is I don't think I have it here. Perfect. Yeah. It's a non-alcoholic gin and tonic. I know it sounds strange, but you know there's many situations where you want something really good to drink, but you can't drink because you're driving, you're sick. So this is another product that I have. It's called Perfect. What else? And it's a ginger. It's a true gin and tonic. Botanicals, a true tonic, but without alcohol. And we're selling it online called something called theperfectdrinks.com.
Henrik, can you give us that recipe again for the pimento cocktail?
Kronan and pimento.
Yes.
Well, I think it's all about how much Kronan you want in relation to pimento. I like it. You know, it's really something if you wanted to use it with another rum, but I like it where Kronan comes through, and I get that little spicy notes in it. And the lime, I always like lime in pimento as it is, straight up, because as I said, it's originally made as a non-alcoholic cocktail. Or when you put it in rum or Moscow mules or whatever, that little extra lime kick is always fantastic. It's for me, it's sort of the key element in it. But
Okay.
balance is up to you, depending on the rum, depending on your mood, how much you want in it. But there's no specific, 2 ounces of that and this much of that. No, it's more.
But there was lime was in it also, right? So it was lime, Kronan, and pimento.
We're also selling that in Texas and Wisconsin and a couple of other states. And I'm very happy to see that, for instance, Perfect start to come out in liquor stores in Texas, because I always think it's good. We all enjoy our rums. There are situations where we can't drink our good rums because we have to go to work, or we have to go to the gym, or we have a big meeting, or we are on medication, or many other reasons. But we're still wanting something good to drink. For me, it's all about the taste. And if it's Kronan, it's equally important as anything else I drink or eat. And going back to cocktails again, one of the really famous cocktails that you find, which maybe sounds a little bit odd, is the Waldorf No. 2. Have you heard about that one? It's from Astoria, and I think it was first presented in the early 30s. Well, 39 maybe, 34, sorry. And it's actually gin, Kronan, and lime juice. I think it sounds strange when you think it, but when you blend it, it's actually really good. And I think that the key thing here is the botanicals in the gin combined with the complexity of the Swedish punch or the rum and the lime juice to all put it together. Think about tiki cocktail like Diki Diki, which is not truly a tiki cocktail because it was created already in 1922, a little bit before the tiki era. And it's Calvados, grapefruit juice, and Kronan. Kind of an interesting blend. And if you want to try that, my recommendation is 1.5 Calvados, 1.5 Kronan, and 1 grapefruit juice. It's all about how you like it, how much of the gin you want, or how much of the Calvados you want come through, or Kronan come through. And you find a lot of different recipes. The original one is 2 Calvados, 1 Swedish punch, and 1 lime juice. But based on that, remember how sweet the Swedish punch was in the early days. So for me, equal pot Calvados and Kronan and grapefruit juice.
It's a nice tie into Florida too. Of course, we have good grapefruits here as well in Florida, so that might be something of a nice tie-in. Yeah,
it's very, very fresh. It's a really fresh drink, and the funny thing when we talk about pimento, many of the classic drinks, even for Kronan, you can substitute some of the dark alcohols and actually use Kronan. If you have a cocktail where you also have simple syrup, you can not have simple syrup and use Kronan because of it already have sugar, and do your cocktails, like old-fashioned kind of style and things like that. And the other day I bumped into a cocktail where we had tequila, Cointreau, lime juice, we had Kronan, and topped up with ginger beer or ginger ale or pimento. So it's really a multifaceted kind of product. I even make a Mai Tai with Kronan. Believe it or not, instead of using a high proof rum, I'm using 2 parts Kronan, 1 part Cointreau, right? 1 part lime juice, and I think it's a half of this almond liqueur, almond syrup, or gum. And you make a really good Mai Tai. I know.
So, Henrik, I made the Diki Diki here, which I had never tried before. But something I really like about it, first of all, I didn't use enough Kronan. So I would like to do the 1-to-1 ratio of the Calvados to Kronan. I think that would be better. But the interesting thing about it, I think, is that Calvados has this, a good Calvados has this sort of like barnyard funk to it, you know, from the apples and the farm and everything. And I love that about Calvados. And I think that pairs nicely with the richness of the rum and, you know, the funk that comes through from the Iraq, Batavia, Iraq. And so it's a nice pairing, and then it's all lightened up with the grapefruit juice. So it's a nice recommendation. Thank you.
I think it's a really fun drink. And there you go. There you go. You're set. I think it's a really fun drink because I remember many years ago when I still was in Sweden, I did a blend for a restaurant which was based on unaged Calvados, young fresh Calvados, and my Swedish punch, and we served it out of big barrels at a cocktail as a drink, and it really pairs well with the characters of the Swedish punch and the Batavia rack and the rum segment of the West Indian rum. So, you know, it makes sense when you think about it. Of course, the acidity you have from the grapefruit is fantastic. It really takes it into nice and long and fresh. And that's one of my favorites. My biggest problem is when I made a Mai Tai the first time, it was too short. And I just zipped it up and it was gone. I mean, you can't keep doing that. It's too good. It was like a dessert. Some people would say that you probably need a little bit of a high proof rum in that one, but I enjoyed it. I think it was really good, and it's all about, it's like you said, it's all about how you balance it, depending on, like I said, Kronan and bourbon. What kind of bourbon are you using? You have to smell it and taste it, and then you know roughly what kind of balance you want between it. Same
right,
thing.
Especially with bourbons being some more rye mash bill and some having a different mash bill of more corn, high corn content. So that can make a difference.
It definitely does. And I think that there is top of my head, I forgot what it's called. Hesitation. There's a cocktail called Hesitation with Swedish punch in, and it uses rye. I think I can't remember what I used. I had some Angel's Envy to do that, and it's a really interesting combination because, you know, the 100% rye really makes it a little bit more, how would I say, there's a little bit of kick in it. So, and then you balance it really well with the sweetness that comes from Kronan and the complexities. It's just sort of back to that balance again. And that's really something that I find with anything from a good cigar. As I said, this was one of the biggest things they did in Sweden was smoking cigars. And funny enough, and this is something that I didn't know until I started research, Sweden was a big cigar and tobacco nation up to the early 1900s. Every city, especially in the southern part of Sweden, was declared that they should keep land to grow tobacco. Who many know that we did tobacco plantations in Sweden? I didn't. Absolutely amazing. Big industry in those days. Late 1800s. So if you ever find a cigar from the late hundreds in Sweden, or it says Swedish tobacco, well, it's actually Swedish tobacco. So fascinating. But it's the same thing there. You can have so many different characters of your cigar. If you go Cuban, maybe you want a product a little bit more oomph in it when you drink it. But if you have a Dominican and many other of the really good cigars, the balance of the smokiness, of that bitterness that you get in the cigar really goes well with a softer rum, not high proof, you know, bang, 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 but a softer rum. And I know that, unfortunately, when you go to a cigar club with a bottle of Kronan, if you have one bottle with you, they drink it. If you have two bottles, they drink it too, because it really blends well, especially if you have a little cool outside, sitting somewhere and enjoy it. So sweetness, nice complexity of flavors, and that bitterness of the cigar, the smoky notes. Like when we talk about coffee liqueurs, espressos, you know, that balance, or good chocolates. One thing that maybe surprise you is blue cheese. If you buy a good blue cheese, then if you're lucky to find Swedish gingerbreads, those little thinner ones, Swedish gingerbread, if you buy it by IKEA or something, buy Swedish gingerbreads, buy a really good blue cheese, and a glass of Kronan. Couple of pears too. Couple of nice ripe pears. Maybe you soak them in Kronan a little bit before. Wow. Trust me, if it doesn't taste good, send it over to me and I eat it. So it's funny when you start to think about combinations. I mean, think about a Stilton and port. Stilton cheese, blue cheese, a lot of characters, quite potent kind of cheese. Port wine, lower alcohol, sweetness, complexity. Same thing. Great flavors. It's really getting good. Unfortunately, Kronan and foie gras doesn't go that well that I hoped. And I love foie gras. So it's a, you know, you can't win them all. But really, the funny thing I did when I started to introduce my first Swedish punch in Sweden was to serve it with blue cheese, because it opened people's mind. What is this? You can't have blue cheese and our traditional product. And people liked it. Then we had gingerbread, and you know, you think about the dessert plate with a nice chocolate cake and rich dark chocolate, nice little blue cheese, couple of punch cooked pears, and then you have that all together, maybe a little bit of vanilla ice cream on the top, on the side there. All of that together is really good. If you cross them, they work together. Pears and the cheese, pears and the chocolate, vanilla and the chocolate, etc., etc. So it's all about finding, like when you guys make cocktails, tiki cocktails. I'm not a mixologist. I think that some of the mixologists we have worked with are amazing. They come up with ideas that I would never in my life come up with. And it's the same thing idea. They know their flavors. A good mixologist, they know that, they can try something. They go,
I think you've given them something great to work with the product in Kronan, and starting with making good rum. I think Scott French said earlier that you started with a good rum, and that's why you end up getting great drinks out of it. So thank you for bringing that. I know it's getting to about the end of our time. I want to make sure if there's any last questions anybody wanted to get in before we go ahead and conclude the session. Go ahead if there's anybody.
don't forget the challenge.
What we'll do is we'll post the challenge on the Facebook group. So we'll make sure to have that there, and we can work with you, Henrik, and make sure that you put in the specifics for that. So we'll make sure to get that up because it sounds like a fun thing for the group to do. And I know we have a lot of talented people in the group for mixology. So that would be awesome. And thank you for doing that and providing that challenge for us. Any last questions before we wrap up? All right, I'm just seeing thank you, a lot of thank yous in the chat, and we really appreciate you being with us and these great samples. Thank you for doing that. And thanks to Brock as well for, I know he had a hand in that. I know he's not here, but thank you to Brock for getting us those samples, and thank you to Jay for organizing all of this. And thank you, all of you, the members, for being here time after time. It's becoming more of a family at this point. So I just really appreciate every week seeing your faces and for having such great product coming through. And Kronan being the latest of those. So thank you all. I'm gonna hang around for a little bit in case everybody wants to chill with their drink, but I appreciate it. And thank you again, Henrik. Let's give him one last round of applause.
And guys, I have to say that I'm so happy that I had a chance to tell you a little bit more of Swedish Punch. It's unusual, it's funky, but it's not that bad, huh?
It's delicious.
I appreciate that. You know,
Very good. Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you, Henrik.
thank you guys.
Thanks for hosting, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you guys for making it easy.
It's nice to know that when Jay slacks off, that we've got you to back him up. So.
Hey, yeah, that's right. It's a tough job, I have to tell you. I wasn't able to be as funny as usual because I was so focused on making sure everything was going right. So
You have to turn that Zoom crank, right?
that's right.
Going.
And I really hope to see the stream as one festival.
I just made my first spicy and stormy, by the way. I don't think I did it right, but whatever I did is really good.
That's tasty. That's what I'm drinking.
I was just impressed to see you shaking drinks over there, John. Congratulations. You got yourself a shaker?
Man, I got an almost tiki shirt. I've got almost mixing stuff on
That's great, man. That's sweet. Hey, what are you guys drinking over there, Jenna and Jose?
They've got a Halloween theme going on. It's pretty cool already.
Yeah, they look like they had mixed something up good there in the mugs.
They're like, nah, this is just Thursday for us.
You guys have a really cool background, like Mickey, Joe, you have a really, I mean, I've seen pictures of your dog.
Yeah.
Can you say go to me?
I'm having trouble hearing. I'm sorry.
Good to hear you, Henrik.
I see pictures of Mrs. and Joe's dog. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing.
There you go.
For some reason, the audio is not working now, Henrik. I'm glad I didn't do that earlier. I'm sorry.
Well, it's time to wrap it up and have about Thursday. So.
All righty. Thank you guys again. We'll make sure to get together to post on the challenge on the group.
I think that's going to be exciting. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Great job, John.